Hey, what's up? I'm the Vault Fowler from all your favorite Fallout games. Psych, I'm Hugh, and I'm here to break down the politics of Fallout New Vegas. If there's anything that defines New Vegas, it's its tense political situation, marked by several factions vying for power with different designs on how they want to see the future of the Mojave Wasteland. Today we're going to be looking at some of the major factions in New Vegas and trying to place them on a chart of their political alignments with the classic political compass, one of the least reliable but somewhat still effective ways of categorizing political belief. First, let's look at the four endgame factions and try to place them in the four quadrants of the political compass. So, first we'll start off with Mr. House. So, I think Mr. House is the most obvious one, where he would fit in the bottom right of the compass. So, Mr. House's political beliefs would probably most closely align with anarcho-capitalism. So, unlike the NCR and Caesar's Legion, Mr. House has no interest in expanding beyond the walls of New Vegas. Instead, he sort of wants to keep the wasteland the same in the sense that he doesn't want any major shift in the political powers. So, as we know in the Fallout universe, America before the nuclear war was a very capitalist society that was at odds with communist China. So once the bombs dropped, we haven't really seen a major societal reorganization. So generally, despite the lack of economic activity, we can infer that the wasteland still operates in a capitalist mindset. So with Mr. House is probably about the richest person, if not in America, at least in the close area around the Mojave Wasteland. So with Mr. House, he, compared to the Caesar's Legion and NCR, he doesn't really want people to have that many laws or taxes in their lives. His primary interest is pursuing his business ventures, which include building up the Strip. And any plans he has for human achievement, he wants to do as a private citizen with a large amount of power, rather than operating through any large bureaucratic state. So, some elements of Mr. House could be construed as more authoritarian, but this just shows the contradictions that are already inherent in the libertarian right. He doesn't want many regulations because he knows that as long as there's little political rule, that he'll have more power than almost everyone else due to his large amount of money that he already has pooled through many generations of the wasteland and obviously in the pre-war era. So he doesn't want the NCR or the Caesar's Legion because he wants to have as much power as possible to private citizens without any laws regulating what he wants to do. But compared to the libertarian left, he also doesn't really believe in equality of outcome as much and believes that since he's the one, and he believes in competition, but only competition where he still has his pre-existing capital that he has accumulated over hundreds of years. Another aspect of House that shows that he has anarcho-capitalist beliefs are that he does want a security force defending the Strip, but he wants it to be a privatized security force instead of like a police force. So he wants his own Securitrons patrolling around and them just being a private force that can keep law and order within the Strip. While I would say the most opposite of Mr. House is probably Caesar's Legion. So I've been going back and forth on this a lot of who would represent the authoritarian left or right, because initially I thought it was fairly cut and dry that Caesar's Legion was more authoritarian right. But really when you think about it, or at least from my perspective, it's probably actually Caesar's Legion that's more in the authoritarian left. So this might be a little confusing just because generally the left side is considered the more progressive, and NCR is definitely more progressive in its liberal values than Caesar's Legion is. The NCR also has much more centrist beliefs than the Caesar's Legion. However, when you look at where different dictators actually align on the political compass, most people would assume that it's sort of the Nazis or fascist Italy that are in the top right quadrant, but the political compass itself places the top right as Pinochet's Chile, which is probably a little closer to the NCR. So the reason for this is because even though Caesar's Legion is fascist and very authoritarian, they also want a lot of control over their economy, whereas NCR is more encouraging of a more free market capitalist economy. So this is more in line with Pinochet's Chile, where they brought in economists that were educated in America to espouse more capitalist free market ideas within the context of an authoritarian dictatorship. One way that Caesar's Legion is different from most people on the authoritarian left is that they believe in a strict social hierarchy. So while Caesar's Legion generally believes that its citizens should have equality of outcome as long as they contribute their proper role to Caesar's Legion society, they don't believe that everyone is born equal and they think that everyone is on a stratified level of society. So we see this with the way that they treat men versus women in their society, where Caesar himself, and just like we see in society with a lot of patriarchal societies today, where they openly say that they're not misogynistic or hateful toward women, but then they have very strict gender roles where both men and women fit in their society. So one way that this is a little bit complicated is that the political compass defines economics on a left to right scale. So generally from what I've read, the compass more interprets the left as like a more state-controlled economy and like more protective of its citizens. But originally the left and right was a term that came about in pre-revolutionary France, where the left were the people that weren't supportive of the monarchy and the right were the people that were. So if you look at sort of the classic definition of the left-right spectrum, you could argue that Caesar's Legion is actually further to the right because they represent a more monarchical presence. But on a spectrum of capitalism versus not capitalism, Caesar's Legion, despite being very socially conservative, is probably further to the left economically than the NCR, but are also much more authoritarian. So when you look at a political compass of dictators, obviously pretty much all of them are at the top of the authoritarian axis, but people like Mussolini or Hitler are closer to the center than they are to the far left or right. And this is actually somewhat of a misinterpretation of how the political compass works, because fascism isn't necessarily pro-capitalism. So if we take Mussolini, for example, Mussolini originally was a socialist that then had an ideological break with the Italian Socialist Party over World War I because he believed that Italy should have a more active role in the war, whereas the socialists at the time were against World War I. So when he did become a fascist, while he wasn't anti-capitalist anymore, he also wasn't necessarily pro-capitalist, and with Hitler taking the Nazi model of fascism from Mussolini, we see that the relationship between fascism and capitalism isn't necessarily cut and dry. So despite Caesar's Legion being much more authoritarian than the NCR, they're actually further to the left than you probably would assume on the economic scale, because even though they don't want an equality of outcome for everybody due to their belief that society should be stratified, they also don't believe in the like capitalist tendencies of like House and the NCR, and more want to be able to control the economy. A way that Caesar's Legion can be compared to the Soviet Union is that, although when we look back, it's very clear that the Soviet Union had huge issues, many of the citizens actually saw their lives generally improve under the Soviet Union, even if it was a very tyrannical state that unfairly targeted certain groups. But we see this also with Caesar's Legion, where although a lot of the people are just like enslaved and have miserable lives in Caesar's Legion, the sort of civilians that are protected by the Legion often have seen the areas that are Legion controlled improve for them because there's less crime and it's more safe and generally just more organization. So this is just like how the Soviet Union citizens saw their lives improved due to it being a very totalitarian society that was able to quickly create law and order at the expense of people's individual liberties. So the NCR would probably fit into the authoritarian right. So they are the most centrist of the factions in Fallout New Vegas. So they're definitely less authoritarian than Caesar's Legion is, and not as far to the right economically as someone like Mr. House, but sort of by default of there being 4 quadrants, I'll place them there. So another reason for this is NCR is generally reflective of current American politics, and we see with almost every politician in America today, both Democratic and Republican, the political compass itself places their statements sort of in the right quadrant, sort of in the left corner to center of that quadrant. So other than a couple outliers like Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard or Justin Amash, most current politicians in America are in that top right quadrant. And so with the NCR, we see it as a reflection on current American politics. Both the US and the NCR were built on democratic values, but the NCR has been a neoliberalizing state that is also showing more neoconservative tendencies with their willingness to wage war. So generally we're seeing the NCR go in the same direction of America, where it's becoming more of a centrist neoliberal state that also is pretty imperialistic. One way that the NCR is authoritarian is that they are very imperialistic in the way that they go about trying to like reach new citizens. So they never actually want to give the people of the Mojave a say in if they want to be part of the NCR or not. And we see these concerns reflected by Arcade in the game, where he says that even if the Mojave was part of the NCR, that would likely take many years before they even get any sort of seat on like the council or their top government. So one way that we see how the NCR represents modern American politics too is due to their sort of neoliberal policies, a lot of private citizens get a disproportionate amount of power, which isn't as much of an issue in the Caesar's Legion. So with the Caesar's Legion, we see that the merchants are free to trade in the territory, but they're much more like regulated by Caesar's Legion. Whereas in NCR territory, people like the Brahmin barons have been able to get a large amount of capital and power that gives them more power than citizens that are less well off in that society. Just like in America, how studies have shown that only the top 30% of economic earners in America have any real sway in politics. So, Yes Man is definitely going to be in the libertarian left quadrant. So with Yes Man, you can really take him in whatever direction you want, but at least in my way I play New Vegas, Yes Man is always going to be aligned with the followers of the apocalypse, and is generally going for a freer Vegas where the citizens have protection against powerful figures, whether that be Caesar's Legion or Mr. House, that are more interested in furthering their own goals. than actually listening to what the people of the Mojave want. So with the yes man ending, this is designed to give the people of the Mojave more self-sufficiency than we'd see if they were ruled by. So if you go with yes man, you're going with yes man because you don't want a larger state ruling the Mojave, and you want the power to come from the individual citizens. So we see this as much in line with a more anarchist school of thought, which would be in the bottom left. Especially with the followers of the apocalypse and especially Arcade pushing hard for an independent Vegas. We see that with independent Vegas, you're trying to protect the average citizens so rich capitalists like House can't exploit them, while at the same time not trying to create a tyrannical society like Caesar's Legion, where people have no freedom in what they do with their life. The Boomers resemble a libertarian socialist society, sort of along the lines of the Zapatistas. So we see that they have no intentions of growing their community, but that they want to build a strong, self-sufficient community from the local level. And they want to do this in a way that is equal and gives everybody freedom while also trying to protect its citizens. The Boomers' isolationist way of building up firepower actually does resemble Rojava today in northeast Syria, which was a community that was created after New Vegas came out, but we see a lot of similarities, and due to the fact that they're a Kurdish majority and generally want to give more rights to women and other groups, that they find themselves with a lot of enemies right around their borders. So despite trying to have an egalitarian and more peaceful society, they still have a very strong defense force that they have to build up to keep their community safe, even though they personally don't believe in violence or tyranny as a solution. Oh, can you call this Hugh Vegas?
That's a good title.
Hugh Vegas, I like that. Noah, when you're editing this, remember to call this Hugh Vegas.
Oh, you could call it Fall Houch Hugh Vegas.
Fall what?
Fall Houch.
Like Houchley.
Fall Houch.
Hugh Vegas.
Yeah. Oh, Fall Houch Hugh Matcha Magus.
It's not even a point. You don't even mention point. Oh my gosh. No, I'm keeping that in though. That one's.
Well, have fun, you guys. I mean, what, you can get like 75% done? Or?
Yeah, I think we're just going through the lightning round now.
Alright, well,
Wow, Fall Houch Hugh Matcha Magus.
Alright, I'm going to switch out the batteries in this. Can you hit pause?
Oh, how about Scott Houch Hugh Matcha Magus?